I don't know if this was divine intervention or something very dark. Notes before you read. This is my true, personal story, and I have only told a few people because most do not believe me. This has been weighing on me for over a decade, and I need your guys' thoughts. I wrote this entire post myself, but I used AI to hopefully clarify it a little bit so that it is less confusing, specifically the explanation of what our street looked like. Thought it would be wrong if I didn't disclose that. I am honestly super nervous to share this story. Here goes nothing. I, 23F, was about 8 or 9 years old when this happened. My mom and I lived in a third-floor apartment while she was in nursing school. One of her friends from school, whom I'll call Mary, had a daughter around my age, maybe a year or two older. I'll call her Betsy. One night, my mom and Mary were studying and hanging out in our apartment, while Betsy and I tried to find a movie to watch since we had exhausted all our toys. It was around 9 p.m., and I didn't have anything at home that we wanted to watch. Mary, however, had a box of DVDs in her car's trunk. Betsy and I asked if we could go down to the parking lot to look for Despicable Me. Since our apartment balcony faced the parking lot, our mom said yes, reminding us that they'd keep the balcony door open and check on us while we were outside. For context, this is important. Our apartment complex had 10 or more buildings, and we were in one of the buildings at the very back of the complex. The street our building was on had 2 lanes on either side of a long, narrow median that stretched the whole street. This median was large enough to hold storage units, small garage-like structures that residents could rent. On one side of the median, closer to our apartment building, there was a single-lane street for driving. On the other side, there was another driving lane, plus a row of parking spaces lining the street. This is really hard to describe, but I can provide a picture in the comments if requested. If you followed the street in one direction, it would take you past the storage units and eventually curve toward the dumpsters. From there, the road would continue toward the front of the complex. But if you went the other way, it led to another building in the complex and a much larger parking lot, which also had a road leading into the rest of the complex and the entrance. That night, there were about 40 cars scattered throughout this area, some in the designated parking spaces and some along the street. Betsy and I went down to Mary's car, which was parked in a spot across the median, but directly in front of our apartment balcony. Her trunk was packed with clothes, boxes, and other random items, so we had to take a lot of stuff out to find the DVDs. As we were searching, we noticed an old, powder blue pickup truck driving toward us from the direction of the dumpsters. It stopped about 100 feet away, turned on its brights, and just sat there. I've always been an anxious person since my mom had drilled stranger danger into my head from a young age. I told Betsy that we should leave, but she brushed it off, saying the driver was probably just being careful not to hit us since it was dark out. The truck flashed its brights once or twice before finally driving past us. But instead of continuing down the street or leaving the complex, it made a U-turn around the median and went back the way it came. That felt weird, but we were too focused on finding our DVD to think much of it. A few minutes later, we were still looking for the movie. We had resorted to taking everything out of the trunk and putting it on the ground so we could see inside the trunk more clearly. Then, the truck came back. This time, it stopped closer, flashed its brights again, and just sat there. A horrible sinking feeling settled in my stomach. The truck flashed its brights and did another U-turn after it slowly drove by us. Again, Betsy insisted it was nothing, but I told her that if the truck came back once more, I was going upstairs, DVD or not. She laughed at me but agreed. We kept looking, and sure enough, the truck returned and parked even closer. The driver revved the engine multiple times, then inched toward us, flashing the lights repeatedly. Pure terror shot through me, and Betsy finally realized something was very wrong. We started shoving everything back into the trunk as fast as we could. The truck kept creeping closer, stopping, revving, flashing its lights over and over. We were in tears, terrified. Then every single car in the parking lot, at least 40 of them, turned on their hazard lights and their alarms started blaring. The entire parking lot lit up with flashing lights. The noise was deafening. I have never heard anything that loud in my life. The moment we realized what was happening, Betsy and I ran. We didn't care about the mess anymore. We just sprinted back to the apartment, screaming. The truck sped off, leaving the complex without going back in the direction it had come from. As we ran up the 3 flights of stairs, I could still hear the alarms. We were crying, panicked, and pounding on the apartment door the second we got there. When my mom opened it, she and Mary looked completely confused. I turned toward the balcony. The door was still open. They should have seen and heard everything. But when we ran inside and tried to show them, the parking lot was silent. No alarms, no hazards flashing, just the mess we'd left behind. Our moms asked why we had left everything on the ground and told us we had to go pick it up. When we tried to explain what had happened, they didn't believe us. They laughed it off and told us to calm down before going back downstairs. I'm 23 now, and I think about that night all the time. I still have nightmares about that truck at least once a month. Betsy and I lost touch after my mom finished school, but every once in a while, I text her to ask if she remembers, kind of to reassure myself that I didn't make it up in my head. She always remembers, and she has dreams too. The only person who ever truly believed me, other than Betsy, was my dad. When I told him the story a few days later, he said I looked more terrified than he'd ever seen me. He thinks it could have been a power surge, but didn't know for sure because it was all so bizarre. I have no idea what happened that night. I don't know if it was divine intervention, something supernatural, or just an incredibly close call with a dangerous person. But I think about it every single day.